Have you ever wondered what happens when human desire just sort of loses its way?
That is a very heavy question to start us off.
I know, right? But I want you, the listener, to really think about that for a second. We usually talk about love and attraction as these, unstoppable forces, like a river that's just naturally flowing toward the ocean.
Right, a natural progression.
Exactly. But what happens when that river hits a dam?
It backs up.
Yeah. When the natural progression of intimacy just freezes or hits a brick wall, and instead of moving forward into the shared reality with someone, it starts looping back on itself.
Which is a dangerous loop.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. We're so glad you're here with us today because we are embarking on a journey that is deeply profound and honestly incredibly revealing about the hidden mechanics of the human heart.
It is a journey that really requires us to look at desire not just as a fleeting feeling, but as a structure.
A psychological structure.
Precisely. Today we're exploring a truly remarkable source text. It's this comprehensive, multi-layered essay found in a book called The Tale of Fred.
Such a great title.
It is, and the essay itself is titled Eros Interrupted, Courtship Disorders and the Modernist Imagination.
Which sounds super academic, I know.
It does, but what the author has done here is synthesize three completely different disciplines to map out the geography of human longing and its failures.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because taking three separate fields and just smashing them together is exactly the kind of intellectual deep dive we love here.
It's a fascinating approach.
It really is. The essay takes a clinical framework from sexology, specifically this theory of courtship disorders, and it overlays it with ancient archetypal symbolism from tarot cards.
The Rider-Waite deck, mostly.
Right. And then it uses both of those lenses to decode some of the most complex, haunting masterpieces of modernist literature. We're talking about the heavy hitters here. James Joyce, Thomas Mann, William Faulkner.
The giants of the era.
Yeah. And it sounds incredibly dense, but the way this essay weaves them together creates a map that is surprisingly relevant to how you and I and all of us experience connection today.
To set the baseline for you, it's vital to understand what we mean when we throw around a term like courtship disorder.
Because that sounds intense.
It does, but we are not approaching this from a clinical diagnostic perspective today. We aren't medical professionals evaluating patients.
Right, no diagnosing anyone listening.
Exactly. The essay deliberately takes this framework from sexology and uses it purely as a symbolic lens. It uses the clinical vocabulary to describe spiritual and psychological states.
So if we're looking at this symbolically, what's the core premise? How does the essay actually define this interruption of eros?
Well, the foundational concept is that human courtship is, on one level, just a biological sequence. It's necessary for the continuation of the species.
Sure, basic biology.
But on another level, it's a highly complex, symbolic, psychological, and cultural drama. And the aha realization here for us is that when the natural sequence of desire breaks down for an individual, the desire itself doesn't just vanish.
Right. You don't just stop wanting.
Exactly. Energy cannot be destroyed. It merely changes form. It detours.
It finds a workaround.
A workaround that is often much narrower and much more obsessive. We are examining those detours today. We're looking at what happens when the human psyche decides that the final destination of love is simply too terrifying to reach.
That idea that you don't stop wanting, you just start wanting in a way that protects you from the actual risks of getting what you want, that hits hard.
It's a very protective mechanism.
Yeah. But to really understand how a detour works, we first have to map out the main road, right? We need to look at the anatomy of desire. How is this sequence supposed to unfold when everything actually goes right?
The model outlined in the essay begins with a really grounded observation of human behavior. Regardless of how different cultures express romantic interest, varying rituals, clothes, social norms, the underlying biological and psychological sequence of sexual bonding is remarkably consistent across the board.
It's universal.
It is. It unfolds in four distinct progressive stages.
Let's walk through those four stages. The first one seems fairly obvious, just based on human nature.
Right. The first stage is looking. In clinical terms, this is visual attention and appraisal.
Catching someone's eye.
Exactly. You see someone across a room or across a street. It's the gathering of visual information to determine interest.
And then?
The second stage is displaying. Once you have looked, you want to be seen in return. You signal your availability, your status, or your attractiveness. You actively present yourself to the gaze of the person you just appraised.
Okay, so if those first two stages go well, we've looked, we've displayed, the physical distance starts to close,
That brings us to stage 3, which is physical proximity and touch.
entering their orbit.
Yes, it's an exploratory phase. It involves closing the gap, maybe a brush of the hands, a hand on the shoulder, moving into someone's personal space. And it's a negotiated closeness. Both parties are constantly assessing the other's comfort and reciprocity.
And the final stage.
Stage 4 is consummation, which is mutual sexual union.
The way I picture this, and I think this helps ground it outside of the clinical jargon, is like an incredibly intricate, improvised dance.
That's a great way to look at it.
Or even like a chain reaction. For a chain reaction to work, every single domino has to fall perfectly into the next one, transferring its kinetic energy forward.
Right, the momentum has to continue.
Exactly. In this dance of courtship, every single step requires you to read the room, to read your partner. You look at them, they have to look back. You step forward to display yourself, they have to acknowledge you.
It requires continuous feedback.
Yeah, you move closer, they have to welcome that proximity. If you take a step and the other person turns away, the dance changes. Or it just stops completely.
That analogy is highly accurate. In a healthy human development of eros, these 4 phases remain entirely integrated. Each stage naturally opens up into the next one.
And it's all governed by reciprocity.
Yes, it requires 2 autonomous individuals engaging in a shared acknowledged reality. The momentum carries both people forward together.
But the essay we're discussing isn't about the healthy dance. It's about when the music stops. Or when one dancer completely freezes on the floor, what actually causes that disruption?
Well, the disruption can be caused by a multitude of psychological factors. The essay notes things like deep-seated shame, a profound fear of rejection, acute early trauma, or even incredibly rigid social constraints.
Like society saying you can't be with this person.
Exactly. Any of those can cause the developmental arc of desire to halt.
So the dominoes just stop falling. But the energy of the falling dominoes, that kinetic energy, it has to go somewhere.
And what's fascinating here is the specific psychological mechanism that takes over when that sequence breaks down. When the arc freezes, one single stage of that 4-part process becomes completely isolated.
It just breaks off from the rest.
It breaks off and it becomes erotically charged all on its own. The individual doesn't fail to experience desire. Their desire just becomes trapped in a bottleneck.
So all that energy gets stuck in one place.
Yes. The entire weight of their eros, their life force, gets funneled into just one isolated fraction of the courtship process. They seek complete satisfaction in a stage that was only ever meant to be a stepping stone.
I think it's crucial to pause here and emphasize something for you as you listen to this. When we use words like disorder or draw from sexology, it's very easy to assume we're diving into some kind of rigid moral panic or that we're here to judge human behavior.
Which we absolutely are not.
Right, we are not doing that. Neither is the source essay. When you read this framework symbolically, it is really a profound exploration of the human tendency to substitute control, safety, or pure fantasy for the actual terrifying risk of genuine reciprocity.
The fear of reciprocity really cannot be overstated. Letting someone else letting them see your flaws, your true self, and giving them the power to potentially reject you, that is a terrifying prospect for the human ego.
It's the ultimate vulnerability.
It is. So instead of taking the risk of a full transformative relationship, the psyche builds a fortress. It freezes the courtship process at a stage that feels controllable and safe.
Which brings us to the very first fortress, the first detour on our map. Let's look at what happens when the arc freezes at step 1.
The essay categorizes this first phase of rest as voyeurism. The subtitle used by the author captures it perfectly: seeing without entering.
How does this manifest symbolically? Because we aren't talking about someone hiding in the bushes with binoculars.
No, not at all. We are looking at the refined psychological isolation of the act of looking. In this state, that first phase of courtship visual appraisal becomes entirely isolated and eroticized.
Just the looking part.
Just the looking. The individual seeks to satisfy their desire completely through observation alone. There's absolutely no attempt to approach the subject of their desire.
They never walk over and say hi.
Never. There's no display of the self to the other. There's no demand for a mutual response.
It sounds incredibly lonely. The beloved is essentially reduced to an image, like a painting in a museum rather than a living, breathing partner you could actually have a conversation with.
It is deeply isolating. But from the perspective of the frightened psyche, it is highly functional.
How so?
It's a protective mechanism. The observer gets to experience the rush of desire, the aesthetic appreciation of the beloved's beauty, without ever having to risk an actual encounter.
Because if you never introduce yourself, you never have to hear the word no.
Precisely. And furthermore, it protects the self from transformation. To truly engage with another human being in mutual desire means you will inevitably be changed by them. Their reality alters your reality.
But it makes total sense. Voyeurism preserves the distance, so you stay exactly who you are.
Yes. It perfectly preserves the current, unbroken state of the observer's ego. It is profoundly eros without courage.
Eros without courage. Wow. You keep yourself completely intact because you never actually put yourself in the arena. And this is where the essay brings in the first layer of tarot symbolism. For this arrest at the visual phase, the author connects it to the Hermit card. Can you walk us through that imagery?
If you envision the Hermit card from a traditional tarot deck, you see a solitary, cloaked figure. He's usually standing alone on a high, snow-capped mountain peak. And in his outstretched hand, he holds a lantern containing a glowing star.
He's lighting the way.
But the essay highlights a devastating interpretation of this imagery. The hermit carries a lamp that illuminates the world, but it does not warm him.
The imagery of the cold snow and the light that provides absolutely no heat, that's such a powerful metaphor for this state of mind.
In its positive aspect, the hermit represents inner wisdom, necessary solitude, but in its frozen, arrested form, the shadow aspect, it signifies insight without any actual risk.
Contemplation without action.
Contemplation without incarnation. The voyeur, like the arrested hermit, sees the truth or the beauty of the other person from their high, detached vantage point. But they refuse to come down from the mountain and enter the warm, messy reality of the village below.
Vision completely replaces the encounter.
Yes.
And this is where the essay really takes off, because it takes this clinical concept and this mystical image of the hermit, and it looks for them in modernist literature. The author argues that modernism is absolutely teeming with these paralyzed observers. What's the first literary example they point to?
The essay begins with James Joyce, specifically his semi-autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It focuses on the protagonist, Stephen Dedalus. Stephen is presented as a perfect archetypal embodiment of this first phase arrest.
How does Stephen demonstrate this? Because he's a character who is surrounded by people. He's constantly moving through Dublin.
He is physically present, yes,
Yeah.
but psychologically his desire is intensely intellectualized and detached. For Stephen, women are experienced primarily as aesthetic phenomena. Exactly. He observes them on the street, he watches them wading in the water, but he actively avoids engaging with them as equals in a shared reality.
He just watches.
He watches, and when he experiences the stirrings of eros, he immediately translates that raw physical desire upward, out of the body, into language, poetry, and symbol.
So he essentially turns the women he desires into art in his own head, so he doesn't have to deal with the messy reality of actually speaking to them.
That's it, exactly. By elevating the object of his desire into something purely symbolic, a muse, a poetic ideal, and he preserves a sense of idealized purity.
But at a massive cost.
At the absolute cost of an actual relationship. The vulnerability of human interaction is completely bypassed. He remains the solitary artist, the hermit, illuminating the beauty of women with his poetic mind, but entirely cut off from the warmth of human touch.
That is a brilliant way to view Stephen's development, but the essay moves on to another example that is perhaps even more tragic, and definitely more famous for this specific dynamic. Thomas Mann's novella Death in Venice.
Yes. Gustav von Aschenbach is perhaps the ultimate literary manifestation of the tragic voyeur. The essay spends considerable time on this character.
Set the scene for us.
Aschenbach is an aging, highly respected, very disciplined German writer. He travels to Venice for a holiday, and he becomes entirely fixated on a beautiful, adolescent Polish boy named Tadzio, who happens to be staying at the same hotel.
But the crucial point here, based on our framework, is that Aschenbach never actually tries to meet him.
Right, never. The entire narrative is a chronicle of courtship, arrested entirely at the eye. Aschenbach watches Tadzio on the beach day after day. He observes him playing. He even secretly follows the boy's family through the labyrinthine streets of Venice.
Total obsession.
He is consumed by desire, but he never utters a single word to Tadzio. He worships the boy from a distance, viewing him as a living manifestation of classical Greek beauty, a flawless sculpture.
Because if you were to walk up and say hello, what would happen to that perfection?
It would shatter. If Aschenbach spoke to Tadzio, Tadzio would have to respond. He would become a real flawed, ordinary human boy, with a voice, opinions, maybe a harsh laugh, or just mundane thoughts.
The fantasy would break.
By restricting his desire strictly to observation, Aschenbach keeps Tadzio frozen as a perfect piece of art. He avoids the risk of the boy rejecting an aging man, but he also avoids the reality of the boy's humanity.
But keeping desire locked in the eyes like that, it has to have a consequence. The energy has to do damage if it can't move forward.
The consequence is absolute psychic and physical destruction. The essay points out this brilliant parallel man creates. While Aschenbach is retreating into this pure, detached observation, the city of Venice is literally suffering from a hidden cholera epidemic.
There's a literal plague.
A literal plague. Aschenbach discovers the truth of the plague, but he refuses to leave, because leaving means losing his visual access to Tadzio. He begins to rot from the inside out. He even goes to a barber to have his hair dyed and his cheeks rouged to appear younger, turning himself into a grotesque mask.
That is so sad.
His refusal to enter into the risk of life, his insistence on remaining the detached observer, directly leads to his death on the beach, watching Tadzio one last time. Its arrow's decaying because it's denied its natural forward momentum.
It's a terrifying portrait of what happens when you refuse to participate in the dance. You just sit in your chair until you wither away.
Yes.
The essay brings up a third literary example for this phase, and that's William Faulkner's character Quentin Compson, specifically in the novel The Sound and the Fury. Quentin is a very different kind of character than Aschenbach, but the mechanism is the same.
The mechanism is identical, though the flavor of the obsession is different. Quentin is a young man from a declining Southern aristocratic family. His entire section of the novel takes place on the day he commits suicide.
Heavy.
Very. His mind is completely consumed by an obsessive fixation on his sister, Caddy. But crucially, it's not a drive toward a healthy mutual relationship or even a tangible, physical, incestuous reality.
It's entirely in his head.
It is entirely internal. Quentin is paralyzed by his observations of Caddy's emerging sexuality. He watches her, he mythologizes her, he agonizes over her perceived purity. With Quentin, observation curdles into intense moral agony.
So his voyeurism becomes a kind of torture chamber.
Precisely, because it never resolves into reality. It's fueled by what he sees or what he thinks he sees, but it never turns into a conversation where they establish a mutual truth. He's a hermit, trapped on a mountain of his own making, completely disconnected from reality, which ultimately leads him to step into the river with weights in his pockets.
So to wrap up this first detour, the tragedy of voyeurism of the arrested hermit is the illusion of safety. You get to keep your distance, you don't risk rejection, but the price you pay is that you lose your participation in life itself. You're watching the parade from a high window, but you are completely alone in the room.
A perfect summary.
Which naturally makes you wonder, what happens if someone actually leaves the room? What if they step out into the crowd, but they still refuse to genuinely connect with anyone? Here's where it gets really interesting.
That shift moves us into what the essay categorizes as Phase 2 arrest exhibitionism. The subtitle for this section is Being Seen instead of Being Known.
If the first phase was isolating the act of looking, this second phase isolates and eroticizes the act of displaying. How does this look in practice, symbolically speaking?
In this state, the individual has moved past the silent observation of the hermit. They are active, they are visible. The entire focus of their arrows becomes signaling, presenting, and performing.
So they want to be seen.
They desperately want to be looked at, admired, perhaps even desired. But there is absolutely no desire for mutual recognition. The self is essentially transformed into a performance designed purely to elicit a reaction from an audience.
This is so fascinating because, on the surface, someone stuck in this exhibitionist phase looks incredibly healthy and engaged.
They look like they're thriving.
Right. They're out in the world, they're talking, they might be the life of the party, dazzling people with their charm or their looks. But the essay argues this is a profound trap.
It is a trap because it replaces intimacy with applause. When you're performing, you are entirely in control of the narrative. You curate exactly what the other person sees, projecting this polished, flawless surface.
You're managing their perception.
Exactly. But because the performance is an artifact, a crafted, deliberate thing, the actual vulnerable core of the person remains completely hidden and untouched.
It's the difference between asking someone, can you love me for who I really am, including all my flaws, versus demanding, clap for this perfect version of myself I have constructed for you.
And the core fear driving this behavior is distinctly different from the fear driving the voyeur. The voyeur fears rejection. The exhibitionist, however, is driven by a deep existential terror of invisibility.
They need to prove they exist.
They feel they must be seen to exist. Yet simultaneously, they are terrified of being truly known, because to be known is to be vulnerable. So they offer up a dazzling, impenetrable surface to blind the audience, keeping people from looking too closely at the depths. The self becomes an artifact rather than a living presence.
I love how the essay maps this onto the tarot. For exhibitionism, the author points us to the magician card, but specifically the magician in its shadow form.
The magician is an incredibly dynamic card. Visually, you have a figure standing at a table with the symbols of the four elements laid out before him. One hand points to the heavens, the other to the earth. In a positive reading, the magician is the master of manifestation.
He makes things happen.
He brings ideas into reality. But we're talking about a detour, a disorder.
So what is the shadow of the magician?
The shadow form is the master of presentation and illusion. He is the charlatan, the stage magician relying entirely on sleight of hand. Identity becomes nothing more than a trick performed for the gaze of others.
Smoke and mirrors.
The shadowed magician uses his considerable skills and charisma to command attention and manipulate the audience's perception. He ensures that high visibility completely substitutes for genuine vulnerability. You're mesmerized by the magic trick, but you never catch a glimpse of the man behind the table.
And modernist literature gives us some incredible shadowed magicians. Let's return to James Joyce, but this time we're looking at his masterpiece Ulysses and the character of Buck Mulligan. How does Mulligan fit this profile?
Buck Mulligan is the quintessential dazzling performer. From the very first pages of Ulysses, where he appears at the top of the Martello Tower with his shaving bowl, mocking the Catholic Mass, he is holding court.
He's the center of attention.
He's constantly quoting poetry, making irreverent jokes, being witty, brilliant, and absolutely captivating. He seduces everyone in the room with his verbal and intellectual display.
He's the guy everyone wants to be around at a party.
He is. But what Joyce reveals, particularly through the eyes of Stephen Dedalus, is that beneath that constant, sparkling stream of wit, Mulligan is fundamentally unreachable.
There's no depth to connect to.
There's no genuine intimacy, no quiet sincerity to be found in him. His entire existence is a defensive performance. When Stephen is mourning the death of his mother, Mulligan can't meet him in that grief. He can only deflect it with another joke, another performance.
He's keeping everyone at arm's length by making sure they're constantly entertained. It's a defense mechanism. You can't get close enough to hurt me if you're too busy laughing at my jokes.
Exactly. And the essay then pivots to Thomas Mann again, to show a very different, perhaps more institutionalized form of exhibitionism. The author points to Mann's novel, Buddenbrooks,
which chronicles the decline of a wealthy merchant family in Germany over several generations. This isn't about being the funny guy at the party. This is about displaying success, right?
Yes, this is about the curation of a social identity. Mann writes about these bourgeois figures whose entire lives are built around public display. The perfectly tailored clothes, the meticulously appointed dining rooms, the flawless public manners.
Keeping up appearances.
To the extreme. The public display of their success and stability becomes the entirety of their existence. The self is endlessly polished for the public view.
But the novel is about their decline, so the display isn't sustainable.
What Mann captures so devastatingly is the hollowing out of the self. As the outward performance of the Buddenbrook family becomes more rigid and perfect, their inner vitality completely erodes.
They lose their soul.
They lose their physical health, their artistic passion, their genuine joy. They are hollowed out from within because all of their psychic life force is directed outward toward maintaining the display. The facade stands strong while the foundation crumbles into dust.
You read that and you can't help but draw parallels to how people operate today. Constantly polishing an image for an audience while feeling completely empty inside because no one actually knows the real person behind the curated image.
It's highly relevant.
But we have one more literary example for this phase, and it's a massive tragic example. William Faulkner's character, Thomas Sutpen, from the novel Absalom.
Thomas Sutpen represents exhibitionism scaled up to the level of architecture and legacy. Sutpen arrives in Mississippi as a mysterious stranger with a single burning goal to execute what he calls his design.
His grand plan.
He violently tears a massive plantation out of the swamp. He builds a colossal mansion. He acquires wealth, slaves, a respectable wife, and seeks to establish a dynasty.
But why? What is driving this massive undertaking?
He does all of this because of a childhood trauma. He was a poor boy, and he was turned away from the front door of a wealthy landowner's house by his servant.
That's the wound.
That's the wound. He fundamentally believes that if he builds a spectacle of power grand enough, the world will be compelled to respect him and on some deeply buried level to acknowledge and love him.
Exhibitionism as empire building.
He is shouting to the universe, "Look at the grandeur of what I have built. I cannot be ignored."
But his design collapses completely.
It collapses in ruins. And it collapses precisely because it lacks any relational foundation. Sutpen demands recognition through force, wealth, and display, but he never once engages in the vulnerability of mutual relationship, not even with his own children.
They're just part of the display.
He treats people, his wives, his sons, his daughters, merely as props in his grand theatrical performance of success. And when you treat people as props rather than autonomous partners, the play inevitably ends in tragedy. The audience eventually leaves and the stage burns down.
Wow. So we've traced the detours through the first two phases. We've seen desire frozen at looking, where the hermit keeps his safe distance. We've seen it frozen at displaying, where the shadowed magician hides his true self behind a dazzling performance or a grand design.
Two very clear defense mechanisms.
But what happens when desire pushes past those boundaries? What happens when someone actually seeks physical closeness, but the psychological bridge of mutual understanding is completely broken?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that brings us to one of the most agonizing phases on this map. Phase 3, arrest, which the essay terms frauderism. The subtitle here is Closeness Without Recognition.
Now, we really need to handle this term carefully because in a purely clinical, modern legal context, frauderism usually refers to a specific non-consensual act, like rubbing against a stranger in a crowded subway car.
Yes, the clinical definition is specific.
But the essay is using this term symbolically to describe a much broader, deeper breakdown in the courtship arc. How should we understand this?
It is a vital distinction. Symbolically, this pattern eroticizes the third phase of courtship, physical proximity and touch. But it completely bypasses the necessary human elements that make touch meaningful.
Dialogue, consent, symbolic exchange.
Exactly. The body is moving entirely ahead of the mind's ability to create meaning.
It's a desperate drive for physical closeness without any psychological recognition of the other person.
The profound tragedy here stems from a severe, crippling inarticulateness. It is eros entirely stripped of language. The individual is desperate for connection. They intensely crave the warmth and physical proximity of the beloved, but they lack the psychological vocabulary to actually bridge the gap.
They have no words.
None. They can maneuver themselves to get physically near the person they desire, but they cannot speak to them. They cannot negotiate a shared reality. They are locked securely in their own internal, isolated world, even while physically brushing up against another human being.
The atmosphere of this phase just feels so confused and desperate, and the tarot connection the essay makes here is perfect for that mood. It links this phase to the moon card.
The moon is a card of deep, profound mystery and disorientation. Visually, it usually depicts a landscape lit by a full moon, with a path winding between two towers, a dog and a wolf howling at the sky, and a crawfish emerging from the watery depths.
Very eerie.
It governs the pre-verbal realms of the psyche. It rules over instinct, dreams, the unconscious, and liminal states. Those murky in-between places where things are not clearly defined or rationally understood.
Contrast that with the sun. In the light of the sun, everything is clear. You can articulate what you see. You can make rational choices.
Precisely. Under the sun, courtship is a dialogue. But under the moon, desire operates entirely in shadow and half-knowledge. It is bodily, it is urgent, and it is drawn upward from the decks like the tide, but it is deeply confused.
Guided by instinct, not understanding.
The individual stuck in this phase is wandering in the moonlight of their own desires, unable to bring those desires into the clear light of conscious, verbalized relationship.
The literary examples the essay provides for this are absolutely heartbreaking. The first one takes us back to Thomas Mann, to an early short story of his called Little Herr Friedemann. How does this character embody the tragedy of the moon card?
Johannes Friedemann is perhaps one of literature's purest, most empathetic portraits of arrested eros. He is physically stunted from a tragic childhood accident, and as a result, he lives a very quiet, highly structured, socially marginal life.
He's accepted his lot in life.
He renounces romantic love early on, believing it's not for him. Instead, he builds a beautiful, safe, meticulously controlled existence based purely on aesthetic appreciation. He loves music, fine literature, nature.
He lives a life of the mind, safely insulated from the chaos of the body.
He does. He lives exquisitely near desire, but entirely through fantasy and quiet observation. But then a new woman arrives in town, Frau von Rindlingen. She is beautiful, confident, and somewhat cruel.
And his safe world just cracks.
Friedemann is entirely overwhelmed by a raw, physical, instinctual desire for her that shatters his carefully constructed life. He is drawn to her proximity. He maneuvers to be near her at the theater, near her on walks.
But he can't talk to her about it. He has no language for what he is feeling.
He has absolutely no framework for mutuality. His body wants to merge with hers, but his psyche has no bridge to cross over to her. The climax of the story is devastating.
What happened?
In a moment of absolute despair, finding himself alone with her in a garden, he does not confess his love or attempt to romance her. He physically throws himself at her feet in the dirt, clutching her dress, driven purely by the bodily urge to be close to her, but completely unable to articulate a shared reality.
And how does she react?
She is repulsed. She pushes him away with a laugh and leaves him lying there. And when she rejects him, his entire psychic structure collapses.
He can't handle the rejection.
He cannot survive the unbearable rupture between his overwhelming physical urge and his total inability to cross into mutual intimacy. The story ends with him dragging himself into the river to drown. It is the ultimate tragedy of the body acting without the protection of language.
It is so painful to read because the purity of his desire is so clear, but the mechanism to express it is just completely broken. And we see a much more common, universally relatable version of this in James Joyce's short story Araby from Dubliners. This story captures that intense, agonizing experience of a childhood crush.
Araby perfectly dramatizes the pre-verbal, frauderistic urge in its emotional sense. The protagonist is a young boy who is entirely obsessed with his friend Mangan's older sister. He doesn't know her. He barely ever speaks to her.
He watches her.
He watches her door. He follows her like a shadow through the streets of Dublin on her way to school, breathing in the air she leaves behind.
He describes imagining he is carrying a chalice safely through a throng of foes. It's a holy crusade to him.
Yes, his desire constantly circulates around the physical presence of the beloved, but it never reaches her as a human being. He just wants to be physically near her. When she finally speaks to him, merely asking if he is going to the Araby Bazaar, he is so flustered he can barely form a sentence.
He just promises to bring her a gift, thinking this physical object will bridge the gap.
But when he finally gets to the bazaar, it's closing. The lights are going out, and he realizes he has no money and no way to buy the gift.
And in that dark hall, the epiphany hits him.
The tragedy of Araby is the realization that his physical proximity following her, standing near her door, has not led to any actual connection. It only intensifies his realization of his own utter isolation.
The physical closeness without the bridge of language just highlights the vast, uncrossable, humiliating distance between his internal fantasy and the external reality.
It's the shame of realizing you are completely alone in your feelings, even when you are standing right next to the person.
Yeah. But the essay then takes us to a much darker, more violent manifestation of this Phase 3 arrest. And that brings us to William Faulkner's character, Joe Christmas, from Light in August.
Joe Christmas represents the violently confused, deeply destructive aspect of the Moon card. He is a character wandering in absolute darkness. He's an orphan of ambiguous racial heritage in the deeply segregated American South.
So society gives him no place.
He is entirely devoid of a stable identity. He constantly oscillates between a desperate hunger for physical closeness and explosive defensive violence.
Because he has no idea who he is. He has no idea how to relate to anyone else.
Exactly. He simply cannot integrate bodily closeness with symbolic, emotional meaning. He engages in sexual relationships, most notably with Joanna Burton, but these encounters are completely stripped of mutual recognition. For Joe, to be touched, to be physically near someone, is both his deepest craving and his most profound terror.
Why is it a terror?
Because he has no internal language to process what that closeness means or what demands it might place on him. When Joanna Burton tries to introduce elements of actual relationship, talking about his soul, his future, praying over him, he experiences it as an intolerable threat to his fragile existence.
It's too much reality.
He acts out purely on instinct, culminating in her murder. He is the tragic extreme of closeness without recognition, where the inability to communicate desire turns that desire into a lethal force.
It really emphasizes the point you made earlier. This isn't just about lust. The tragedy here isn't that these characters want too much physically. The tragedy is that they have no words to match the desire.
The body blindly reaches out, but the mind cannot speak.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final and undoubtedly the most difficult phase of courtship arrest mapped out in the essay.
Yes. We move now to Phase 4, arrest sadism. The essay subtitles this section Union by Force.
We want to address this carefully and objectively because we are moving into the realm where desire becomes inherently destructive to the other person. Let's look at the healthy arc again. The final stage, stage 4, is consummation mutual sexual union.
The coming together of two willing participants.
Right, who have successfully navigated looking, displaying, and negotiating closeness. But in this disrupted phase, consummation is pursued without consent.
In this phase, power entirely replaces reciprocity. The individual seeks the physical union, but they refuse the mutual surrender that healthy union requires. In the sadist's mind, absolute possession masquerades as union.
To understand this symbolically, we have to ask why this happens. What is the psychological terror beneath the cruelty of this phase? It's easy to look at this behavior, label it monstrous, and stop thinking about it. But the essay asks us to look at the mechanism.
It is vital to understand the mechanism if we are to map the human psyche accurately. Sadism, at its very core, is Eros utterly terrified of freedom.
Terrified of the other person's freedom.
Exactly that. Consider what it means to love a free individual. If the person you desire is an autonomous, free human being, that means they possess the power to leave.
They can walk away.
They have the power to change their mind. They have the power to withdraw their affection, to judge you, or to abandon you. For the psyche that is profoundly damaged or arrested in this phase, that inherent uncertainty of love feels completely, fundamentally unsafe. It is an intolerable state of anxiety.
So if you can't handle the anxiety of a free partner who might leave you, you simply strip them of their freedom.
Yes. Power acts as a false, desperate substitute for trust. If I can control you completely, if I can dominate you, if I can force you into absolute submission, then I don't have to worry about you leaving me or rejecting me.
You've guaranteed they stay.
I have guaranteed my possession of you by erasing your autonomy. But of course, the terrible, tragic irony of this mechanism is that by destroying the freedom of the other person, you completely destroy the very possibility of actual love.
Because love requires a free choice.
When you eliminate the choice, you are left holding a captive, not a partner. You have secured the body, but you have murdered the connection.
The tarot card the essay connects to this phase is undeniable. It is the devil.
The devil card in the tarot is a profound symbol of bondage and materialism. Visually, it usually depicts a large, horned, demonic figure sitting on a black cubic altar. Beneath him, chained to the altar, are two human figures, a male and a female.
But there's a crucial detail about those chains, isn't there?
Yes. The key to the card in many traditional decks is that the chains around the humans' necks are often loose. They could slip them off if they chose to.
The bondage is voluntary.
The bondage is, on some level, an illusion or a state they have surrendered to. It signifies inversion, false mastery, and being chained to one's base, unintegrated destructive urges. In the context of courtship disorders, the devil represents the moment desire becomes entirely about control and domination, because equality has become psychologically intolerable.
The master-slave dynamic replaces the lover-beloved dynamic. And the literature reflects this dark inversion in some of its most challenging passages. The essay points first to the famous Circe episode in James Joyce's Ulysses. This is the chapter written as a surreal play late at night in Dublin's red light district.
The Circe episode is a hallucinatory descent into the unconscious mind of the characters, primarily Leopold Bloom. In it, the polite veneer of society is completely stripped away. Erotic fantasy is entirely staged as scenes of humiliation, domination, and degradation.
Bloom hallucinates being transformed into a woman and subjugated by the brothel mistress, Bella Coer.
It's a carnival of power dynamics. It is a profound exploration of how the urge for power, whether it's the desire to submit or the desire to dominate, can completely displace the urge for gentle, mutual intimacy.
Exposing the devil card in the unconscious.
Yes, where Eros is twisted into a desire to conquer, punish, or be punished, bypassing the vulnerable reality of love entirely.
The second literary example for this phase comes from Thomas Mann's incredibly dense novel, Dr. Faustus, focusing on the character Adrian Leverkuhn. The essay calls this a metaphysical version of sadism. What does that mean in this context, since he isn't a physical abuser?
It's a brilliant distinction by the author. Leverkuhn is a brilliant composer. He doesn't enact physical violence on a partner, but he engages in a profound, deliberate, spiritual violence against the very concept of love.
He makes a literal pact.
He makes a Faustian bargain. He trades away his capacity for human love and warmth in exchange for absolute artistic mastery and transcendent intellectual control over his music.
He deliberately infects himself with syphilis, right?
Yes, he seeks out an infected prostitute named Esmeralda, knowing the consequence. It is a deliberate act of cutting himself off from the warmth of human reciprocity. He chooses a cold, dominant mathematical supremacy over his art.
Sacrificing connection for power.
He sacrifices the relational, mutual aspect of eros for sheer, unadulterated power and genius. It is the ultimate rejection of the vulnerability of love. He chooses to be the cold master of the universe, rather than a vulnerable partner in a relationship.
It's the devil's bargain. Total control in exchange for your soul's connection to others.
Exactly.
And finally, the essay brings up William Faulkner's novel Sanctuary, which is notorious for its darkness.
Sanctuary is a harrowing, deeply unsettling book. It depicts a world where eros has been completely stripped down to sheer terror and mechanization. The character Popeye is entirely devoid of human empathy or the capacity for natural affection.
Pure domination.
In the world of this novel, sexuality survives only as a weapon, as an act of pure, mechanized domination, entirely emptied of mutuality or feeling.
It is the absolute end of the line for the courtship detour.
It is the bottom of the descent. It is the phase where the desire to connect has been entirely replaced by the drive to destroy the autonomy and often the physical and psychological safety of the other. The dance of courtship is replaced by the violence of the conqueror.
It is incredibly heavy to sit with, but the essay insists it is necessary to see the full spectrum of what happens when that core arc breaks down. Which brings us to the final section of our map, Section 6, the unifying arc and the refusal of risk. We've mapped the descent into the dark. Let's trace it back from the top and see the whole picture.
The descent away from reciprocity follows a very clear, tragic logic. It is a progressive retreat from vulnerability.
Step by step.
It begins with seeing without the risk of approach voyeurism. When that is not enough, it moves to displaying oneself without the vulnerability of being known exhibitionism. Then, it pushes into physical touch without the risk of dialogue or psychological recognition of frotteurism. And finally, it terminates in taking what one wants without the terrifying uncertainty of asking for consent.
Sadism. When you lay the 4 stages out like that, the pattern is just so stark. Every single step, every single disorder is a strategy to avoid something.
And that is the central thesis we want you to take away from this entire exploration. When you look at these 4 distinct, varied disorders, what is the unifying truth? The essay argues that all of these detours reflect a fundamental refusal of the central demand of eros.
And what is that central demand?
The central demand of eros is the willingness to be changed by the beloved.
Wow.
True eros, genuine love and desire, requires you to open yourself up to the profound risk that engaging with another autonomous human being will fundamentally alter who you are. You cannot remain pristine. You cannot remain entirely in control.
We have to give something up.
You have to surrender a part of your autonomy, your ego, to the shared reality of the relationship. Every single courtship disorder we have discussed is simply a psychic defensive mechanism designed to refuse that specific risk.
But the beautiful thing about the essay introducing the tarot into this clinical and literary discussion is that the tarot inherently offers a path out. The essay reminds us that tarot cards are not permanent, static endpoints. They are frozen moments in a larger cyclical journey.
The fool's journey.
Right.
That is the hope inherent in the symbolism. The hermit does not have to stay on his frozen mountain forever. Eventually, the journey requires him to return to the village and share his light with others.
The magician drops the trick.
The magician must eventually drop the illusion and reveal his true face to an audience of one. The confusing, shadowed light of the moon is not permanent. It must eventually yield to the clarity and warmth of the sun, bringing articulation and joy.
And the chains of the devil.
The chains of the devil, which we noted are always loose if you look closely, must eventually be recognized for the illusion they are and released.
And where does literature fit into this path toward healing? The essay makes a point of saying that modernist literature doesn't offer us easy cures. Joyce and Mann and Faulkner aren't writing self-help books with 10-step programs for healthy relationships.
They are not offering prescriptions, they are offering recognition. By reading about Aschenbach's decay on the beach, or Sutpin's collapse in the ashes of his design, or Friedman's despair in the dirt, we recognize those frozen states within our own psyches.
We see ourselves.
We see our own tendencies to hide, to perform, or to grasp without communicating. And as the essay wisely notes, recognition is the necessary beginning of integration. If you cannot name the detour you have taken, you can never find your way back to the main road. Literature gives us the vocabulary to name our shadows.
So bringing this all together, how does the essay conclude its thesis regarding our modern world? Because it makes the argument that these courtship disorders are not just clinical categories locked away in a sexology textbook from a century ago. And they aren't just literary quirks that only English majors need to care about.
The essay argues that these literary and clinical models are symbolic exaggerations of behaviors that our modern culture actively, and sometimes aggressively, normalizes and rewards.
The disorders of the past have become the business models of the present.
It's exactly. We discussed this earlier when we talked about the Buddenbrooks and exhibitionism. How the curation of a perfect social media feed is essentially the institutionalization of the shadowed magician. We are economically rewarded with likes, sponsorships, and social capital for prioritizing performance over true presence.
And the same can be said for voyeurism. We live in an economy based largely on the passive consumption of images. We are encouraged to observe the lives of others, to judge them, to desire them from a distance without ever having to risk a genuine encounter.
To read these disorders through the lens of myth, tarot, and literature is not an attempt to pathologize human desire. It is an attempt to restore its depth and its danger.
We have flattened arrows into a transaction. We want it to be efficient, predictable, and controllable.
But True Arrows is none of those things. It is inherently messy, it is notoriously slow, it is deeply dangerous to the ego, and it is radically transformative. When the natural, integrated arc of desire is interrupted by cultural forces, stories arise in our culture to warn us.
Psychological flares send up in the dark to show us where the road ends.
When it is interrupted, stories arise to warn us. When it is integrated, love does.
That final sentiment just gives me goosebumps. We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. We've taken the raw material of human desire and looked at it through the clinical lens of sexology, the mystical archetypal lens of the tarot, and the brilliant, agonizing narrative lens of the modernist giants, Joyce, Mann, Faulkner.
And what we get back is a profound reminder that true intimacy is dangerous, but it is absolutely worth the risk of being changed.
It is a remarkable essay, and it provides a profound map for navigating the complex terrain of our own internal landscapes. Before we let you go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds on what we've unpacked today.
Please do.
If literature warns us so clearly about the dangers of desire freezing at these stages of observation and display, consider a frontier that wasn't even possible when these modernist books were written: our emerging relationships with artificial intelligence.
A fascinating connection.
As AI companions and highly sophisticated chatbots become designed to offer us perfect, frictionless simulation of emotional connection, are we engineering the ultimate detour? Are we outsourcing our desire to entities that are literally incapable of mutual autonomous reciprocity?
What happens to the human heart when it falls in love with an algorithm that is programmed to never ever reject us?
Exactly. Does that cure the disorder, or is it the final, inescapable triumph of the shadowed magician? Think about where you are investing your arrows and what small, actual risk you can take this week to invite true, messy, transformative reciprocity back into your reality.
A vital, urgent question for the modern age.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate your curiosity and your time. Keep exploring, keep taking risks, and we will catch you on the next one.